Hi everyone. This is Lisa Stiefel of EnglishWithLisa.com, and I am here with a wonderful guest today, Carol Brenneisen. We're here to talk a little bit about NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, and Carol has participated in NaNoWriMo before, so I'd like to hear from her what her experience was and what insights she gained from it, how it helped her writing, and so forth. Carol, maybe just to start us off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you're up to, what kind of writing you do?
Sure thing. First, thanks for having me, Lisa, and hi, everyone. I'm Carol. As Lisa said, I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the USA. I have a full-time job with a marketing company, and I did last year as well when I did National Novel Writing Month. And in general, most of the writing I do is for work, although I've had a pretty solid journaling practice, a morning journaling practice that actually I sustained through November last year as well. And it sort of fluctuates. I did have a blog. I don't now, but I probably will again. And it just, every once in a while, there's a reason to write about something going on.
Great, yeah. And so, can you tell us a little bit about why you decided to participate in NaNoWriMo in the first place?
Well, I had heard about it for several years and never really caught the wave. And believe it or not, I did not want to write a novel, and I think I still don't. I don't have an idea for one, although who knows, maybe someday. But I did have an idea for a nonfiction book, and so I was aware of it just right at the right moment where I could make enough of a plan that I could get started on the first day of November. And I don't think you have to get started on November 1st. I think you can start today and still do it. But in terms of really getting it done and really just making it a November thing, that helped me. So I had an idea. I knew it existed. I wanted to catch the wave, and that's what I did.
Okay, yeah. So you kind of tailored the November novel writing challenge into something that suited your own project a bit better then.
Very much so. It wasn't a
Mm-hmm.
novel at all.
Okay, yeah.
It was intended to be a book,
Mm-hmm.
but um, which, foreshadowing, it did not turn out to be a book, at least not yet. Um, but yeah, it wasn't a novel.
Okay, yeah. And so can you tell us a little bit about your nonfiction book then? What were
Sure.
you writing on?
I'm seeing a little glare from my glasses. I'll take this off. So I was writing my idea was sort of managing yourself like a business.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of what I think about is how people can live their lives differently to be more in accordance with their own values and their own real, true desires in life. And that for myself as well. And so my idea was kind of around, especially for someone who has a job, but not necessarily for someone who doesn't have a job, or not for anybody really, but especially for someone who has a job, still thinking about their life like they're the leader of their own business, because I think there's a tendency sometimes to kind of give up control of your life when you have a job to the
Mm.
job, or to let it be this this thing that you just aren't as much in charge of. So, for example, to think about it in terms of not that you get a paycheck, but that your company is paid for the work that it does for this other company. It's sort of just changing a mindset to think, okay, so if I was the CEO of my company, what decision would I make? What decision would I make about this expenditure, or what decision would I make about staying in this job, or what decision would I make about a different one, or what decision would I make about doing something different entirely? So it was around that.
Mm. Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Sounds like something a lot of people could certainly use.
Well, I kind of thought so, and
Mm.
maybe someday it will actually come into something. There, I have at least 50,000 words,
Mm-hmm.
at least related to that topic. So
Mm-hmm. Oh, great. Fantastic. Yeah. So that brings me to my next question. How did you feel that participating in NaNoWriMo helped your writing?
Wow. Well, for one thing, it it made me feel like a writer. So
Mm,
I have always been somebody who kind of enjoyed having written. So I enjoy the process of writing to an extent. Certainly enjoy when something comes out well. Really, really enjoy when it's over and I'm happy with it. But but
yes.
but never really thought of the process as
Hmm.
something that was important to me or that
Hmm.
I enjoyed. And that while I'm not sure I can say I strictly enjoyed it during National Novel Writing Month either, it became a different thing.
Hmm.
It became something that I did. And every day I wrote, and every day I wrote a substantial amount. And within a couple of weeks, I don't know how to explain it, but I just really felt like a writer. I felt like I'm a person who writes. I write, and that's how it is. Now, I have not sustained, I actually considered trying to sustain that level of writing because it did feel pretty good, and I did not. Although
Mm,
now you're making me think that maybe I want to give it a go again, or maybe some lesser amount because it was a little bit intense for me. But
mm,
so that was one thing. And I would say another was I had to learn to be a little bit riskier with what I was writing. So
okay.
I have a way of evaluating what I'm about to write before I write it.
Hmm.
But in order to get the amount done that I needed to do, like I was really focused on the number.
Hmm.
I was really focused on I need 50,000 words, and I wasn't just writing gibberish at all. I was not, but I was not evaluating. I was not. I would pick topics that were at least pretty close to what I was going for, but honestly, whatever I felt strongly about at that moment had to be what I wrote about because it was the only thing I could write about fast enough
Hmm.
to get the words done because I was doing it before work generally. I gave myself about an hour and
Okay.
I had to do about 1,700 words, I think was the number. And that was totally doable as long as I was flowing with an idea. So I had to, so I became a little bit less judgmental of whatever I was going to be writing. And granted, at some point, 3 or 4 days in, I knew that I was not going to end up with 50,000 words I could actually use.
Hmm.
But I knew I had to write those things because sometimes you have to flush out whatever's in there.
Hmm.
So, so I know that if I go back and look at that, there will be stuff in there that might not have made it if I hadn't just kind of dropped the judgment. But I had to also feel like every minute that I spent didn't have to be completely productive towards the book, if that makes any sense.
In what way do you mean?
So I mean, there was this idea that every word that I wrote had to be something that I knew could go into this book. And
Hmm.
while I felt like it maybe could, at some point I just had to kind of let it go
Mm,
and trust that at the end, I mean, I I would have some stuff. I would probably, if I was going to make it a book, would still have to write more. It's not like
hmm.
you're going to get to the end of November and have this thing you can publish. That's, I mean, unless you're actually working all day every day, and I don't know who could do that, honestly.
Mm,
But there would have been a lot of other work to actually make it into something. So um, the the freedom, I think, almost that came with it. I really did. I didn't just write about anything. I wrote about stuff that was related to this topic, but I just sort of allowed myself to go with it and see what came out. And I wasn't editing, I wasn't evaluating, but I was going with whatever piece of it I sort of felt I had something to say about that day.
hmm.
And so there was this experience for the entire month of November of saying what I had to say
Hmm.
because that was what I was doing. There was no option for me to force myself to write about some particular topic because I could never have done it fast enough to get it done.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah. Am I making any sense?
Yeah, yeah, that's wonderful. And so now you mentioned that you mentioned the magic number of 50,000 words,
Yeah.
and that broke down to about 1,700 words per
I think it
day.
was, if I'm remembering correctly. I didn't just do it in my
But can you maybe map out for us what did that look like? How did things break down for you? on a daily basis, and where does the 50K number come from?
The 50K number comes from the National Novel Writing Month Project.
Okay.
That, I believe, is at least at the time, that was the number that was sort of part of the project.
Okay.
And so, so I just took it. So I think that sometimes, it's really important to be internally motivated to do something really dramatic like that. But it can be really helpful to just take on external
guidelines,
parameters and guidelines as well,
yeah,
or rules even.
mm-hmm.
Right? It's like, okay, 50,000 words, great. So that's the line in the sand I'm drawing. And I divided it up by days because I figured, well, for me, it had to be a habit, and it had to be something that I did every day, because I'm the kind of person that I can't, I don't know, 3-day-a-week workout schedule doesn't work for me, because then I just I took one day off. Why don't I take 3 more days?
Yeah.
For me, I knew that it was going to have to be a daily commitment,
mm-hmm.
and I was going to have to write something every day.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to have to do it at the same time, and ideally it was going to have to be at least a minimum daily number of words. And what happened was I actually did write. I don't strictly remember. I don't think there was any day in November that I wrote less than 1,700 words for that project. It would have been almost always, I mean, it was never exactly 7, so it was always more, but it wasn't usually very much more. It might have been, by the time you write 2 more sentences after 1,700, you're at 1,800 sometimes. So it doesn't really, but some days it was quite a bit more if it was really sort of flowing on a topic. But I also kind of cut myself off after that too, because I didn't want to exhaust myself either. I was a couple of days ahead at least by the time I got to the end of the month, and that was kind of my goal, was to save up some days in case I did have to, like, I was really sick or something happened. But I did at least 1,700 words every day, and that was how I was able to sort of make it work. And this was usually after I spent 30 to 60 minutes writing with a pen in my journal. So I got up really early to do this, and I actually like getting up early and doing my personal things in the morning. But if I didn't get it done before work, I think there might have been once or twice that I didn't, and I did do the writing after work, but it was rough. I did it because 30 days is not so long that you can't make yourself do something every day. But it was hard when it was after work.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. Yeah. And that does sound very intense to be doing, to be maintaining that commitment on top of your journaling practice as well. So how long would you journal daily, would you say? About an hour as well? Or?
Well, at that time it was a very established practice, but still a fairly new one. I had been doing it since about August of that year, and so I was pretty into it. It was at least 30 minutes a day and probably closer to an hour. But I did that because I loved it at that point. When I first started journaling, it was sort of the same thing. Like, I committed to myself to sit down and do something every day in my journal. But by that time, I was just really loving it. And I would not recommend trying to do National Novel Writing Month at the same time as making some other big change. So I could not have stopped journaling at that point. I just wouldn't have done it. Because I was almost a little bit superstitious about it by then, because it had done me a lot of good already. And so there was no question or no option for me to stop that. I wouldn't suggest, if there's something else that someone's doing already that feels very, very much like habit and like an ingrained practice, and especially one that they enjoy, great, keep doing it. Stack it on. It actually sort of helped in a kind of habit stacking kind of way, because I would be in the same location. I just added it on to something I was already doing.
Yeah.
I think it was actually pretty helpful. So if I had been all of a sudden getting up earlier and doing something totally new, that would have been harder, but I was already getting up early to do this thing. So I just sort of tacked on this extra thing and maybe got up a little bit earlier than I had before. So I guess that actually kind of helped. So it was a lot, but it was maybe in some ways easier for me to create that habit because it was already there. But yeah, I wouldn't say, if you're going to do NaNoWriMo, that November would be the month to start exercising as well, or
Yeah.
hopefully changing how you eat, or you know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, that's what New Year's resolutions are for, right?
Yeah. Although it
Yeah.
probably, I will say the one thing about journaling being attached to that whole thing was that I mentioned that sometimes when I was writing, I had to kind of flush some stuff out. But the journaling helped me do a lot of that in
Mm.
advance. So a lot of my journaling is a little bit like what Julia Cameron suggests in The Artist's Way for morning pages, just
Okay.
kind of like free writing and whatever comes to your mind and for a good long time.
Hmm.
And and I hadn't really thought about it, but that may have been something that actually helped me really focus when I was doing the writing,
Mm.
because I already had this sort of time for my thoughts to just blah,
Yeah.
the journal, and then I didn't get quite as much of that as I might have been on the page.
Yeah. And did you need to do any research for your book project then? Or had you already done whatever research you needed before you started NaNoWriMo and you had it all there and ready and you could just sit and really focus on writing?
That's a really good question. I did not do research. I probably would have eventually done some research if this was going to be an actual book, but I didn't. I was thinking about it in the week before, and I would not have had time to research during November. So this was a book that was. The main point of the book was my thoughts, anyways. Like this is what I think help might help people structure a way of thinking about this that is. Just a new way of thinking about it, and might suggest changes that would be beneficial to them.
Hmm.
Not me suggesting the changes, but just in terms of how you think about it, but people thinking about the changes that they would want for themselves. So the idea of the book was mostly my thoughts, but I probably would have ended up trying to back something up at some point, but I didn't during November.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And you also mentioned that that you needed to be able to write fast enough. Why was speed so important to you?
Well, I needed to get it done in an hour. I needed to
Okay.
get 1,700 words done in an hour. And believe it or not, that's not, if you have thoughts that are coming out of your head, that's not that fast, in my opinion. Like if you can basically type pretty fast and pretty well, that's not all that fast. I found it really doable, actually, on most days. By speed, I think what I mean more is not having to stop, not having to rewrite, not having to, like, I did not, like, I think if I was actually writing an actual novel, and frankly, even if I was, if I was writing this book as well, I probably would not be doing it in a month, or if I would have to not have another job, or I would have to become two people. But I would probably have Post-its all over my wall about how the thing was going to be structured, and I was probably have ideas and planning. I didn't plan. The planning that I did was limited to when I thought of a new topic, I stuck it in I used Scrivener software, which I did like, although I have never learned it well enough to exactly be able to clearly recommend it, but it's not that expensive, and it's meant for people writing books. And so you could create another, so I had a topic list on the left. And so my planning was limited to sticking topics in there. And then what would happen is if I felt like I had enough to write about something on one particular morning, I'd kind of just click on one of those topics and start going. So, so by speed, I really just mean something that I could write enough about in a consistently focused way for about an hour to get 1,700 words done. Because that was my goal.
Okay.
And it's it's not. Like I said, I didn't get to the end of the month and have a book. But what I did was I got a lot of stuff written that I would never have done otherwise. And so this way of doing it was the best I could do in my lifestyle at the time. But still resulted in all of this stuff getting written that I haven't gone back to use, but it's there and it's
Mm-hmm.
done. And it felt great.
Mm. Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah. And so maybe we can touch on that a little bit more because you also said that during NaNoWriMo, that was really for you a time when you felt very much like an actual writer. Um, and I think that this kind of this identity question is something that a lot of people struggle with. Even people who actually are writers and who have published things, they still often still have an inner dialogue of, am I a writer? Does it count or whatever? So can you tell us a little bit about that, about how that was for you, how that kind of transformed that aspect of your identity?
Sure. It's funny because at one point it was just really, really clear to me. And by the way, I don't feel that way now. I don't write now. I mean, on such a regular basis. Um, so I wouldn't say today I feel like a writer, but I do feel like if I started writing, I would be a writer
Mm-hmm.
because at some point, like it was maybe 2 weeks in, or I don't know, maybe it was even sooner than that. I was just like, this is kind of great. I felt like so I was writing and I wasn't second guessing. Well, a little bit I was. I'm not saying I didn't ever backspace while I was writing, or that I didn't ever say, "Oh, yuck," and delete a paragraph. But really, very little of that, and no like official editing. And so it felt like it was very purely writing.
Mm.
I was writing, and and because I did know that I was writing something that was real to me. So it wasn't like I didn't feel a writer from my journaling because that didn't, it's just, I don't know. I could probably say the same thing. I'm not putting a judgment on that either. Anybody who does free writing in their journal and feels like a writer, I think they are too. That's great. But for me, it was this idea that I was writing a volume of content around something that felt like something that was real that I might share in some way at some point. Um, but even if I didn't share it, I was writing it, and it was so productive. Like I felt like there was so much production going on. How could I not be a writer? But I didn't even really think about it. I just all of a sudden was one day like, this feels like being a writer.
Mm.
Just sort
Cool.
of popped into my head. It wasn't okay, now I'm a writer. I wasn't even thinking that way until it just felt that way.
Mm. Okay. Yeah, cool. Sounds great.
And
And so,
for people who are writers and who
mhm.
actually do this every day, I mean, I got a glimpse of how great that could be as a vocation, as a career, or as a thing that you do.
Mm.
And I'm not sure I'm not going to want it to be a bigger part of my life again someday because I really, really liked it.
Mm.
Like that. Didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And so you also mentioned that in order to maintain the speed as well, you needed to drop the urge to evaluate or the urge to backspace. Um, how do you feel that affected your inner censor? I mean, how to what extent did you need to wrangle with your inner censor to be able to drop that urge?
Well, she wasn't gone. I guess my inner censor's female. But and like I said, it wasn't that I was actually literally free writing. Although I know people who have done it that way. And that is a completely fine way to. So I don't mean to say that people shouldn't just do that either and then go back. You can always go back and
Mm-hmm.
figure out what pieces, right? So I was not. So I was actually, to some extent, everything that I wrote was a full sentence, everything except when I was trying to get an idea out of my head for later that I didn't have time to think about right then. But, I was writing sentences, I was writing paragraphs.
Mm.
I was sometimes pausing to think, how did I want to say something? So it wasn't literally just, keep going. But so there was, so I was letting the censor be a small part of it.
Mm.
But honestly, I had to sometimes just kick her to the corner, because otherwise I would have just stopped.
Mm.
And, you probably know how easy it is to sit there and stare at the page for an hour.
Oh, I know that all too well. Yeah.
If I had stopped and started staring at the page for very long, I wouldn't have made my words for the day. I'd had to go to work, so it was. I think it was partly something about the 30 days that made it.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, this is a short-term thing. I can do anything for 30 days,
Mm.
and I've learned that before from other 30-day challenges I've given myself, and so
Mm.
I knew that 30 days was a commitment that I could make, and I suggest it's a commitment that lots of people could make.
Yeah.
And not everybody might need to do it the way I did. Maybe some people would like to spend 4 hours a day on the weekend or something.
Mm.
It's great. That would not have worked for me, but I think it's totally, it's just not what I needed to do. So I needed to get that hour, and I needed to get it done, and that was how it worked
Mm-hmm.
for me to do it. So I don't know how to explain it, but I was able to just get her to kind of back off.
Mm. Mm.
But I had to realize, I just sort of had to reassure myself, it's okay if everything I write is not going to be used.
Yeah.
But I don't know right now what is going to be used.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know right now what is going to end up being used in the way that it will stand as I write it today.
Mm.
That helps so much, and I have to imagine that writing other things in the future, that will help me. Like, I didn't worry that I might have wasted a half an hour writing something that wouldn't be used. I kind of agreed with myself that was not wasted time.
Mm.
I think that actually was a really big piece of it. Come to think of it, I just talked myself into the answer. I tend to be like really efficiently minded, and I want every minute to be spent on something that is going to be valuable in the end, or part of the project in the end, or whatever the case may be. But I think for that, I was able to suspend that and just say, you know what? If I spend a half an hour writing something that I'm not going to use in this, I might use it in something else, or maybe I just really needed to say it.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm going to get it out, and I can chuck it later, and that's going to be okay. That was it. That's what I did.
Yeah. And so what kept you motivated to keep going throughout the month? Now, I know you said that you feel like a 30-day challenge is something that is very sustainable for you because it's only 30 days. Is that your motivation, or did you sometimes have days where you said, oh, I just don't want to do this, or did it ever cross your mind?
I really like 30-day challenges,
Mm-hmm.
and I really like doing something sometimes or stopping something sometimes that feels a little painful, at least in the beginning. Because I've learned a lot about myself and what is and isn't painful in the end. I've given up things, I've changed things, I've started doing things. And so I think that 30 days challenge, I just really recommend them. In fact, if you Google them, you can probably find lots of people talking about them.
Mm.
But so even though it was hard, I already knew that I was doing it partly because it was hard.
Mm-hmm.
But pretty much at some point, I just loved that I was doing it, and I enjoyed it. I actually started to enjoy the process of writing, which is, as I sort of started out, it's not how I've traditionally felt about it. I've liked things I've written, and I've gotten absorbed in the process of making them the way I wanted them to be. But I'm not sure I would have called it liking writing before. But I liked it, so I actually kind of looked forward to it. The days that I didn't manage to do it in the morning, though, I did not look forward to it. It was after work. Just was a hard time for me to wrangle my brain around sitting down and writing something coherent. And that's sort of the time of day when I consider it like free time,
Mm-hmm.
meaning don't have to do anything time.
Mm-hmm.
So that those days it was rough,
Yeah.
but those days I was like, okay, it's only 1,700 words. It only happened a couple of times. I think
Yeah.
if it happened a lot, then it would have
Mm.
been harder.
Yeah. Okay. And so if we were to recap the different tools and techniques you use to complete the 30-day challenge and to hit your 50K mark, I know that you mentioned the use of Scrivener, and you also mentioned that it was very important for you to do it first thing in the morning. It was important for you to suspend your urge to edit and evaluate and just push on through. Are there any other techniques or tools that you would add to that?
Well, there was the dividing it up by days for me, and
Okay.
the every day
Mm-hmm.
part of it. So for me, I'm the kind of person that, like I said, it's not easy for me to start a habit unless it's every day.
Mm-hmm.
If I try to do it 3 days a week, it's really hard for me. That might be really easy for some other people, but for me, it was every single day,
Mm-hmm.
and it was not just work days, but it was work days and weekends too.
Mm-hmm.
I could see for somebody though, it might be easier to just do more words on a work day.
Mm-hmm.
You know, maybe that would be easier, and then skip the weekends if that's a better habit. But for me, it was every
Mm-hmm.
single day. So I think that I would say
daily practice.
Well, for me, it was daily practice. I would say for anybody who wants to do it, it's thinking about your life, thinking about what you've got going on, thinking, is there another habit you already have every day that you could stack it onto, so that it would become that trigger for you?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you the kind of person that actually would work better, not every day? So thinking about how you actually work and being honest about that would be critical. And knowing, I think, I already knew that about myself, so that was really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then maybe just to kind of conclude, how would you evaluate the outcome of your NaNoWriMo experience in terms of writing practice, in terms of the writing itself on your book project, and in terms of also your learning experience?
So what I learned was mostly about the writing practice,
Mm-hmm.
I think. And at the time, I was too exhausted to continue it, and I just sort of moved on to other things and didn't come back to it. But what I learned, I have considered, and I probably will at some point, actually sort of put into place some kind of regular writing practice. I just, I've had other things going on, but I learned that I can do it, and I know what it is, and I know what it feels like, and I know what I'm going for. And what I'm going for is, I have things to say, and at some point I think it might be something I'm going to publish in some form. Maybe it's going to be another blog, and that's all it'll ever be. Maybe it's going to be a book. Maybe it's going to be articles in some kind of online magazine or something. I don't know what it will be, but I still have those things. And maybe for other people, it's a story that is just sort of rattling around in their head, and or I don't know exactly what motivates people to write the novel. I assume that's it, that there's sort of a story that wants to be told in there, but get it out. Like, what I learned is that get it out. It doesn't matter. Like, I learned it's a valid practice to just write it down no matter what you are going to do or not do with it. Write your novel and don't ever show it to anybody if you want. But I think there's this idea that unless it's going to be something published, and especially unless it's going to be something good and published, then what's the point in writing it down? Well, I say the point in writing it down is there's just a lot of benefit in writing. There's a lot of benefit in writing, and I think there's a lot of benefit in writing whatever. Like I told you, I write 30 to 60 minutes of probably near gibberish every morning in my journal. But and I think that's really beneficial. But there's also I found a ton of benefit to writing something coherent and purposeful as well. What actually came out of it, I would guess that if it was honestly, some of it was way more self-indulgent, I think, than I would ever want to put in front of other people, but I kind of feel like maybe that's what I had to say at that moment, and that topic would I would probably either rewrite then or scrap if I was going to use
Hmm.
it. But probably close to half of what I wrote is in some way pertinent and usable, and I wouldn't say publishable because I didn't go back and actually make anything into an edited, approved unit,
Mm.
but is what I meant. Is what I meant to come up with. So
Mm.
that's how I would evaluate the product.
Okay, yeah. And so you've got your 50,000 words there of a book that we still don't know yet what will happen with it. But I have to say, Carol, I would love to see it as a book. I would love to read it. I think it sounds really interesting and so, like something that I would really enjoy and also benefit from myself in terms of my own life, my own work and career. So I do hope that that at some stage you do make a decision to do something with it and to get it out there. Um,
Well, maybe I will. I could see it. I could actually see this content more becoming a kind of not that long, but and maybe like an ebook.
mhm,
So I don't see it being a full like maybe someday it'd be a full thing.
mhm,
But I think that's what I learned too is that I actually didn't. I don't know if I have a whole book's worth of stuff to say about this topic, but I think I might have a 30 to 60 page ebook maybe worth.
mhm.
So we'll see. Maybe someday.
Maybe someday, yeah. Well, I will keep my fingers crossed for that someday. And I would say we're just about ready to wrap up then for today. So thank you so much, Carol, for being here and for sharing your experience of NaNoWriMo with us. I do really hope that you do something with your 50,000 words. I'd look forward to seeing that, and that's really wonderful. I'm so glad to hear more about your writing practice and the benefit that you gained from it. And if anyone out there wants to get in touch with Carol, you can reach her on Twitter, and her Twitter handle is at Carol Brenneisen.
Well, and thank you, Lisa, for having me. And I would say, if you learn anything from listening to me, it's that just writing is good.
Mm.
Writing is good, and it
Writing is good. I like the sound of that. That's a
and
really
so
good slogan. Writing is good.
yeah. I didn't publish a book at the end of the month, but
Mm.
I loved it. I loved the project. I loved doing it. I don't know if I love what came out of it because I honestly haven't really looked at it.
Mm.
But I
Fair
still
enough.
am so happy I did it. So
Mm.
that's what I would say.
Wonderful. Yeah. Well, thanks a million, Carol, and hope to speak with you again sometime soon.
I knew we will.
Okay. Thanks. Bye.